Chapter 6. A lone piper was standing on the ramparts of Glamis Castle, filling the evening with the sounds of a lament. Figures were hurrying back and forth along the road past the loch, where the fishing nets, unused that day, were still spread across the rocks. One of those figures was Father Rainey. His face was creased with the worry of a priest who had many problems within his parish. His hands were employed, almost subconsciously, in moving the prayer beads as he walked. His lips were moving, whispering prayers which were carried away by the breeze into the low hills beyond. A dog came by, turned and trotted at the priest's heels, looking up at him as if he were the one to whom the prayers were addressed. When the priest did not look down, the dog stopped, watched for a while, and then continued the journey it had been making before it was interrupted. The priest continued along the road, heading towards a hut at the far end of the village. A glow from a lamp came from the open door of the hut, and as the priest approached, a man stepped outside. It was Dougal. He went out to meet the priest. "Father Rainey, is the boy still alive?" Dougal kicked at the rocky ground. "He's going down fast, Father." "Then I'm in time." "To save him?" There was surprise in the clansman's voice. Then he shook his head. "Ach no, I see what you mean, Father." "I'm sorry, my son." "I ken. He's my cousin. I promised Kate I would look after him. And I failed." The priest put his arm around the clansman. "You did your best. I saw it. That man. Aye, if he was a man. Did you see him? He looked like something from hell. He was no a Fraser, that's certain sure." "Whatever he was, I hope we do not see his like again, Dougal MacLeod," said Father Rainey, stepping into the hut. The scene that met his eyes brought a lump to his throat, though he was used to such sights. Kate was bent over the prostrate form on the reed bed, stroking his brow. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but she was clearly fighting back the emotion that welled up within her, for the sake of the dying man. She looked at Father Rainey's features, hoping, he supposed, that there would be some sign of strength from him. Kate was not one to rely on miracles. She knew that Connor was slipping away from her, and that it was only a matter of time. What she wanted from Father Rainey was not an assurance that her man would live, but something to help her bear that loss. Father Rainey gently lifted her to her feet and then bent over the bed himself. Connor's face was the colour of cold wood ash, and his breath was coming out in laboured gasps. There was dried sweat on his eyelids and in the corners of his mouth. He opened his eyes slowly, fixed them for a moment on the priest's face, then closed them again. "Rest, my son," said the father. He began to cross Connor, saying at the same time, "In nomine Patri, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." He paused, then finished with, "Amen." Kate made a soft sound behind him, and the priest turned to look up at her. "It is over." Kate clutched her skirt, breaking down at last. "No!" she wailed, and then began sobbing. "I must leave you," said the priest, Other men are dying this day. Dougal nodded. We understand, Father. Angus now stood in the doorway. His great head hung on his breast, and he looked like a defeated warrior. The priest put his hand on the man's shoulder as he passed through the doorway, and Angus gripped it for a moment. Father Rainey said, I must attend to the others. Then he was gone, out into the night. Angus moved over to the bedside of the fading MacLeod. He listened to the shallow breathing for a moment, then said to Kate, Be quiet. She looked at him in astonishment. Angus glared at her. He's a Highlander, by God! Seeing that this was not enough, he added, The last sound he hears shall not be that of a wailing woman. She stifled her sobs then, and fell to weeping quietly. The two men stood, equally as quiet, by the bedside of their cousin. Now that there was silence in the hut, the sound of the pipes from the distant castle could be heard, and Connor's eyes flickered and opened. They held those of Angus for a moment, and the clansman nodded. The eyes closed. Angus moved towards the door, took one last look back, and then went outside. He walked down to the loch and sat on one of the boulders to look out over the waters with their starlit ripples. The sound of the pipes found its way into his blood, and he sat there, wondering whether it had been worth it. To lose those of his clan, including Connor, for the deaths of a few Frasers. Could they not have just agreed to kill a few of their own men on both sides? The result was just the same. An exchange of lives. It seemed so foolish now. But he knew it would happen again. It always did. The grievances would build in the hearts of the clan, and it would begin again. There seemed to be no way of stopping it. Not without losing pride, and a Highlander's pride was as valuable to him as his... as his cousin's life. Dougal had appeared by his side. Well, man, he said to Dougal. Hanging on by a faint breath, said Dougal. But he'll no last long now. He'll no see the mother, our cousin Connor. Angus rose, scratching his beard. Shall we away and see the rest of the laddies that were wounded? We cannae do anything for him now, and I doubt he'll be conscious again. Aye, as the father said, there are others in the same plight. We'll need to speak to the widows. And then, I think, a dram would not be out of order. Dougal nodded, briskly. Men were dying, but the living needed strength too, to carry on the fight. The two men went back into the village. Their cousin, Connor, was beyond the aid of priest or physician.